So thanks for joining us for this overview of the Comprehensive Needs Assessment and the connections to the CIP. We're providing this overview for you in preparation for the more in-depth workshop that we have at the end of the month. And Josh is going to drive, I think. Josh, do you have control of the slides?
I do.
Okay, great. So we'll get started providing this overview of our model for continuous improvement and how it relates to the needs assessment. So our continuous improvement model, as many of you already know, is based on the graphic you see on your screen. So it's based on an improvement science approach, and it contains three overarching questions. What are we trying to accomplish? How will we know a change is an improvement? And what change can we make that will be an improvement? And that is connected to the plan, do, study, act cycles as you test your implementation of the changes you've put into your CIP. Next slide, please. And many of the resources you'll be able to locate on our continuous improvement website. So you can find links to the template and the toolkits and many other resources that we will be talking about either today or with you at the workshop or in your monthly meetings. And two of those resources include the Comprehensive Needs Assessment Toolkit, which contains many of the tools and processes you'll hear us talk about today. And we also have posted our Plan, Do, Study, Act, or PDSA toolkit, which contain valuable resources that can help you during the implementation of the changes in your CIP. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's dive into the comprehensive needs assessment. We're going to provide you now with an overview of the main types of data that we suggest you explore during your needs assessment. And these are the types referenced in our toolkit as well, so that you are taking a systemic approach to analysis. And so from this graphic, you can see the four types of data we suggest looking at are related to student learning or outcome data, demographic data, perceptions data, and school process data. And this graphic illustrates some of the data types and how those kind of overlap with each other. And we're going to explore those now a little more in depth. So we'll start with the demographic data, and these data produce evidence related to things like student ethnicity, race, gender, grade level, attendance, teacher retention, teacher experience. And the specific measurement instruments you might use to collect these data include, but aren't limited to, things like surveys, interviews and applications of many of the demographic components you collect on a yearly basis. So questions that these data might answer include: who are our students and teachers? What trends do we see in our student populations? What factors outside the school might help us understand our students? And what trends do we see in teacher retention and experience? Student learning data, probably the one we use the most, produces evidence related to knowledge, skills, and understanding that students have achieved, the degree to which students show conceptual understanding and generalizations, and the degree to which they're meeting or not meeting or exceeding achievement expectations. And specific measurement instruments you might use to collect these data are included, but not limited to, student work products, as well as screeners or diagnostic measures, progress monitoring, formative assessments, benchmark assessments, and of course, summative assessment data. And some of the questions these data could answer include: what do we know about each individual and how they learn? What are the data telling us overall about our grade level or school? Are subgroups performing at optimal levels? And what trends and patterns are we observing for all students in each of the subgroups? And what good news is there to celebrate? So where are their assets? And then what are the challenges suggested by the data? School process data describes and assesses the quality of any of your school programs and processes. So things like evidence-based instructional practices and the implementation of those, curriculum, the existence of it, alignment to standards, the coordination of it, alignment to research, any vertical and horizontal curriculum alignment across grade levels, professional learning, participation in professional learning, perhaps, processes for evaluating staff, resource distribution, program effectiveness, MTSS implementation. So there are many, many types of data you might collect under this category. And then some of the questions or some of the instruments you might use include observations, checklists, process maps, curriculum maps, team records, scope and sequence documents, professional learning plans, etc. And some of the questions these data could answer include how successful are our programs in bringing about the academic excellence we would like to see in our standards? How do assessments, curricular and instructional materials align with those student standards or teacher standards if you're talking about evaluations? How are we ensuring needs-based professional development for all staff? And how is our multi-tiered system of supports, framework, and related processes ensuring that all students' needs are met? Finally, the perceptions data produce evidence that reveal any perceptions, beliefs, values, observations, or attitudes about the learning environment itself. So specific measurement instruments you might use to collect these data include, but are not limited to, surveys, empathy interviews, focus groups, student journey maps, and also, culture and climate surveys, parent surveys, and questions that these data might help you answer might include, how do the members of our school community feel about our school and district? How satisfied are school community members about our educational programs? What do the members of our school community perceive to be the strengths and needs? And what do the members of our school community think about the skills of our graduates? And the list goes on and on. So once you have compiled and analyzed data from these multiple sources and data types, you can begin to identify some trends, assets, and challenges across your system, as well as understand where and when, or where and why variation might be occurring within the system. So you can use your assets to help improve other areas of the system, hopefully. And then you can also do root cause analyses to figure out, to uncover those underlying reasons why challenges are occurring. And you might want to use the sample protocol displayed here for your analyses. It walks through some of the sample questions we've looked at today, as well as uncovering assets and challenges across each of those categories. It's also accessible on our website, and then you also might have other protocols for data analysis that you're using. So you've looked at trends, assets, and challenges, and as you're summarizing those challenges, you can use a root cause analysis or cause-effect diagram to uncover and confirm the underlying root causes of those challenges or problems of practice to make sure that you're solving the right problems. So in our comprehensive needs assessment toolkit, as I've cited before, you can find the tools to help you facilitate this process, as well as a 5 whys process, which is also a root cause analysis tool. And on the next slide, there is an example of what a completed root cause analysis fishbone diagram might look like. I've turned it a little bit on its side so that there's more space to kind of complete. Sometimes the tools can be a little wonky when you're trying to enter information. So whatever format you see fit to make sure that you're capturing that information. So in this case, the problem of practice or the challenge is that some systems, processes, and or practices in math and literacy are not meeting the needs of many students. And a good way to make sure you're kind of framing the root cause in the right way is that you can answer because with all of the scales of the fish, I guess. So that's happening because of these reasons. And the top or the next row, the curriculum instruction assessment, culture, and system coherence and consistency are broad categories that came up in this particular causal analysis that we did with people as those main categories, and then the finer grain causes are included below. And it's important to keep those categories in mind because they will be the drivers in your driver diagram that we'll talk about a little in a few minutes. The drivers toward the goals that you create, and then select change ideas based on those drivers and root causes. Finally, as you're completing your needs assessment, you'll be collecting all of these data and summaries and information. You will want to make record of that in your data inventory. So that's kind of the product of much of what you'll uncover in your needs assessment. And the links are there, and the EQCs and the CFP team can help you support you in completing that template. Slide. Oh, I think I'm going to hand it over to Simona.
At this point, we thought that it would be a good time to hear some questions. If you have any, there is nothing posted in the chat, but if anybody wants to raise their hand or come off mute and ask their question, this might be a good time to do that. Jody, I think you're coming in a little garbled. There's some kind of technical issue. Is there any way we can ask you to type your question, perhaps?
That's a good idea. Does anyone else have a question while we wait for Jody, either maybe to type it in the chat or try again?
Well, Jody, you can feel free to post your question anytime you're ready. I can go on with the slides, and we'll have another opportunity for questions, okay? Right, so in the next section, we'll look at an overview of the components of the SIP, which you will develop based on the information you uncover in your needs assessment. Once you have analyzed the data and the underlying root causes of any problem of practice, you begin developing your working theory of improvement. The working theory of improvement is also called the driver diagram, or is written in the form of a driver diagram. It will be done repeatedly, so it's very iterative, and it shows the relationship between your goals and the proposed changes. The theory of improvement consists of goals or aims. You see those in the green box all the way to the left. Then the drivers, there are main drivers and secondary drivers, and change ideas. The goals are specific, measurable outcomes that are directly connected to your previously identified problems of practice. The drivers include a small set of high leverage systemic factors that strongly influence the outcome, the aim, the goal you are trying to achieve. These drivers connect directly or indirectly to the goal. They will come from your root cause analysis, since typically were identified in that stage. Common drivers include system factors such as curriculum, instruction, assessment, climate, culture, and professional learning. The change ideas are high leverage evidence-based strategies or practices predicted to favorably affect the drivers in pursuit of the intended outcome or goal. I'll move on to the next slide. Here is an example of a driver diagram for literacy-related goals. The goals, as you can see, are written in specific SMART format and followed by the drivers and the change ideas there to the right. Something similar will be in the next slide pertaining to math. It's the same idea with the goals, the specific goals related to the problem of practice, the high-level drivers, and then the change ideas that affected the goal through the drivers. And I think Josh is next.
I think Jody was able to post her question in the chat if we want to address that now, because
Yeah, I was just typing. I was
Oh.
starting to type, but now that's a perfect time for me to not have to use so many words. Yeah, Jody, I think hopefully this answers your question that you might have several working documents and, chart paper, however you're kind of going through this needs assessment to do these processes. But the ultimate products you'll submit to us are the data inventory and the CIP. So as you'll see in the CIP, most of what we're talking about here that Simona is covering is included in the CIP. So you'll have your clear measurable goals, you'll have your change ideas and your measures. So you don't need to upload any extra documentation. So just keep all your working documents with you and feel free to reach out to us along the way as you're grappling with something. So, we've met with people as they're in the middle of their root cause analysis and they want to know, are we getting the right, is this okay? Are we on the right track? Or look, we've uncovered this. How, what are the ways in which we can transfer this to the driver diagram or, just to get feedback on any of the parts in the process. But ultimately, those are the two products that you'll submit.
Thanks, Lori. The first component of the driver diagram are the goals. As you will recall, this is the overarching model for improvement. The first question, what we are trying to accomplish, relates directly to the clear, measurable goals that are necessary to achieve your intended outcomes. Setting clear, measurable student learning goals entails 4 basic criteria: the what, for whom, by when, and by how much. The what component operationalizes the specific skills and processes and practices that are being improved. The for whom component identifies the intended population for whom the goal is set. The by when component identifies when you expect outcomes to be achieved and by how much. The component indicates the degree of improvement you will expect will be made by that time. Basically, you want to be explicit about the intended outcome and what evidence you can collect that will show that students have achieved the goal. So if someone checked back later in the year or you have a new member on the team, what they would see is clear in that goal statement. Measures in the model for improvement. The second question is, how will we know that the change is an improvement? This question relates directly to the outcome and process measures you will examine in service of the goals that you set. So in terms of outcome measures, we can look at long-term or lagging measures and short-term or sometimes referred to as leading measures. Lagging long-term measures include the final summative outcome measure that tells us if we met our goals. Short-term leading measures tell us how we are making progress along the way. These measures might be directly connected to the student learning goal, such as a formative benchmark assessment of skills, or proxies in service of that goal, such as educator professional development or changes to instructional practices, but really something that acts as the intermediary. On this slide, you can see the analogy that the authors of a book called Street Data use to illustrate the differences in the grain size of various measures we use to track progress, and then to finally determine whether or not we've met the goal. The long-term measures, occasional measures. The long-term measures, they use occasional measures. They're using mapping data along the way to measure progress. And then they also use what they call frequent data, which in this case is the examples of student work or information that we receive from exit tickets or observations. Tony?
Thanks, Josh. So recall again the model for improvement. And here, the third question, what change or changes can we make that will result in improvement, relates directly to the selection of evidence-based change ideas. based on your previous data analysis, root cause analysis, and established goals. Change ideas come from examining the research and evidence base and finding the practices, processes, and programs that have demonstrated positive impacts on similar specific outcomes and student populations that you are hoping to impact with your goals. Select evidence-based change ideas or practices based on needs uncovered during data analysis. In order to achieve integrity in implementation, you must describe the practice, program, or processes with enough detail to ensure that everyone understands the what, how, where, when, and why factors of implementation. Also, consider the human, fiscal, and other necessary resources needed to ensure the fidelity and integrity of implementation. Sorry, Josh, next slide. So the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, contains provisions related to specific types of evidence from research, and one should consider when assessing the potential efficacy of a change idea. Next slide, Josh. This collection of resources, this is a collection of resources that provide detailed explanations of the levels of evidence, how to understand the research evidence, and where to locate specific evidence-based practices.
So now we're going to put it all together. I believe we're going to move on to Simona. Simona, you're muted right now.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, I'm back. Let's now look at an example of how some findings from the CNA might be incorporated into the SIP. And here is an example of how goals might be developed using disaggregated data analyses from the comprehensive needs assessment process. In this example, disaggregated data for English learners reveals many potential needs across multiple data categories. For example, student learning data show that significant gaps in proficiency between EL and non-EL students are present. And on local and state assessments, only 10% of EL students in grades K through 3 are proficient in reading standards. So in the next slide, we see that we have the clear setting of goals. And you recall that setting clear, measurable student learning goals entails 4 basic criteria: what, for whom, by when, and by how much. So in this case, the highlighted example shows specific goals related to the data findings for English learners. And in the next slide, we can see that based on these goals and the underlying problems of practice related to the goal, you can use a root cause analysis or cause and effect diagram to uncover and confirm the underlying root causes or challenges to ensure that you are solving the right problem. And in the example, the problem of practice is that most of our English learners in grades K through 3 are not meeting reading proficiency levels. That will be in the box all the way to the right. And here are some potential root causes for the previous problem of practice. So newly arrived families with very little experience in using English language. Absenteeism is limiting exposure to instruction. Lack of strong systemic phonics instruction in early grades. Insufficient time with practicing reading and fluency exercises, for example. Minimal, if any, small group instruction and interventions. Inconsistency with instructional and intervention practices. Lack of the structure from EST. Teacher confidence in content knowledge and pedagogical practice in SOR. And Josh, you can go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, the next step, evidence-based change ideas can be selected based on the problems of practice, root causes, and intended goals. The implementation and efficacy of these change ideas will be what you are monitoring. Often and monitoring often in your PDSA inquiry cycles. You want to make sure to operationalize the change idea for implementation and make them actionable and feasible. In this example, you'll see change ideas include using recommended practices within the IES practice guides, the Institute of Educational Services practice guides, to integrate intensive small group reading interventions, extensive vocabulary instruction, and peer-assisted learning opportunities for EL students. And they also show that they're monitoring progress every 3 weeks, and it's ESSA evidence level 3. So we're getting very specific here on the practices that will be implemented and monitored throughout the PDSA cycles. Prior to implementing the PDSA cycles, you'll want to ensure that you have appropriate measures in place, determine if and how the practices were implemented, and how you would measure the success of the change in relation to the student learning goals. In this example, you'll see implementation is measured using teacher surveys, lesson plan artifacts, learn walk observations, which are the process measures. The student outcome measures include state and local assessment results for long-term outcomes, oral reading fluency measures, and other formative assessments for shorter-term progress monitoring. And here's a slide that shows kind of the side-by-side view of the specific change idea examples, which are the first column, with examples of the related measures, which is the second column. For example, in the second row, you'll see daily small group intensive differentiated instruction as the change idea. The process measures they have here would be lesson plans, observational checklists and walkthroughs, and the outcome measures are weekly formative assessments. Tony.
Thanks, Josh. The last component in the model for improvement is the Plan, Do, Study, Act, or PDSA inquiry cycle process. Once you've selected a change for improvement, you will begin the cycle of planning for implementation, implementing the change, ongoing reflection of progress, and making necessary adjustments based on results. Iterative plan, do, Iterative plan, do, study, or PDSA improvement cycles allow us to learn, adapt, and develop confidence in the efficacy and reliability of an evidence-based innovation practice and from practice-based evidence we collect during each cycle. This iterative 4-stage problem-solving model is used for improving a process or carrying out a change. Student learning data and data related to fidelity, integrity of implementation is collected and examined to assess the effectiveness of the change. The intention of these inquiry cycles is to learn fast, to implement well. During the planning phase of the PDSA cycle, it is important to make predictions about what you think will happen when the change is implemented. What do you expect to see in terms of teacher and student behavior, as well as any systems-related issues that may be impacted? During the do phase, you are implementing the change as intended and collecting relevant data and information about student progress, as well as any process or implementation factors that need to be considered for adjustment, spread, or scale. During the study and act phases, you are reflecting on the data collected, making sense of the results, and determining whether to adapt the change, adopt it for full implementation, spread or scale, or abandon it in favor of another evidence-based change. All of these decisions should be based on data. This image illustrates the framework for the PDSA cycle, including guiding questions to consider during each of the phases. In the plan phase, questions include how, where, when, and with whom will the practice be implemented? What do you predict will happen as a result of implementing this practice? For example, what do you expect to see in terms of student-teacher behaviors and practices? In the do phase, you carry out the practice as intended and collect the relevant data. During the study phase, questions include, was implementation of the practice carried out as planned? What have you learned and how are you making sense of the results? And do these results match your predictions? What did you observe that was surprising? Finally, during the act phase, questions include, Regarding this change idea, how might you need to adapt or strengthen it to meet the needs of all students? And does our theory of improvement or driver diagram need to be refined? And if so, how? We will dive more into the PDSA cycles at the workshop later this month. And then speaking of the workshop, in order to prepare for it on the 28th, please gather student learning, demographic, perception, school process data. And then again, the CNA toolkit can help you select your data sources, and feel free to reach out to your EQC for support. At the workshop, we will use your data to dive deeper into the process as we talked about today.
Any questions? I see none in the chat, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute.
Before we close, Josh, perhaps we should mention what we had discussed for support for the field, an intermediate meeting between the webinar you have just watched and the possibility of the meeting on the 28th. We were going to make ourselves available to apply what you have just heard to your specific case, so as to reduce any kind of confusion and maybe solve any issue you might have with this process, so that we can be more prompt and proactive in assisting you. So you will be contacted in the next few days for a brief meeting.
Thank you, Simona.
There is a question in the chat about, remind us what the workshop on the 28th is. So the workshop on the 28th is all day from 9 to 3:30 to dive deeper into the data and kind of go through some of these processes more in depth. And this workshop's open to schools eligible for comprehensive supports, so that way we can help you prepare this work to submit through your data inventory and SIP process coming up here in the next few months.
There's one more question from Randy. Is the content on March 28th new? The content's not. That was today. Like Simona said, your EQC will be reaching out in a day or two just to connect, to kind of get some input on what's needed on March 28th. All right, I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I guess we can go ahead and conclude today's session. We have recorded it, so I will be sending that out once that's all processed. Other than that, just wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. We'll give you about 20 minutes back of your time, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.